You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Christopher Media. Let's make some noise.
Every 25 years, right? I drop in, right? What are you staring at? Why are you standing there with your finger up your...
I hate everything about my life. I'm not progressing. Where am I going to be in 25 years? Dead?
Wait, Huey? Are you on the lam? Is that what's happening?
Get back here, you son of a bitch! Huey.
Define lamb.
I didn't even know you had a daughter.
I mean, I've been with a lot of women. They're not all careful.
It was their fault?
On a scale from 1 to 10, how amazing is this?
Do you know that your daughter has the makings of a truly brilliant cartoonist?
Graphic novelist. Please. You're not supportive of my work.
It's a penis that ejaculates carbon emissions.
Yeah. Do you know what you suffer from, my friend? Pussy whip envy.
I mean, is that it? In order to play it safe, I have to end up marrying a woman who's old enough to be my wife?
Adorable man.
You're seeing a new chick, you know.
So you want to sleep with me?
She is true and fearless. The Super Bowl of truth. The kingdom of what is and what ain't. And never, no, never what should be.
You've had nothing but contempt for all of us. Where do you get off, huh?
Bangkok is ruined.
Did they let you bring in drugs?
Now, we're still great in this act together. I mean, it's great.
Okay, you know what? Why don't you just take
hours
myself?
and hours. It's
Alpazar! An ugly little wrinkle. That was the card.
You're my best friend's daughter. Doesn't that make you feel awkward?
No.
She finds me in bed with the cleaning lady. Okay, fire the cleaning lady. You don't fire your husband's business. Everything your mama told you about sex is true. Take it down.
Just stop, Huey. Just stop.
Hey folks, welcome to a special episode of The Projection Booth. I'm your host, Mike White. Joining me today is Dan Mirvish, filmmaker and co-founder of the Slamdance Film Festival. Dan has a new film out called Bernard and Huey, which is playing theatrically at select theaters across the nation, as well as playing on streaming services such as iTunes, etc. So be sure to check it out and take a listen to this interview. Curious how you got involved or interested in filmmaking, and where did you grow up?
Like you, I'm from the Midwest. I'm from Omaha, Nebraska. Grew up in Omaha. You know, I'm not one of these kids that was super into film. Although when I was 12, a group of my friends and I did a paper drive. We collected recycled papers and raised enough money to shoot a little sci-fi film called Beyond the Ray of Death. I think it was that, like 5 minutes long, where we basically blew up my friend Harold's train set. But that was the one foray I had into actual filmmaking growing up. But Omaha didn't, we had a couple sort of art screens that was, at the university had a screening series, and I'd see a few interesting things. But it was really only in college. I went to school, got my undergrad in St. Louis, off in the Midwest, at Washington University, which didn't have a film program at the time. But there was one Super 8 class, taught by a guy named Van McElvey. And I really loved that, really got into that. And then also took a political theory class that kind of dabbled a little bit into the film theory side. And I remember there was we were studying the Frankfurt School of the 1930s, this group of pretentious German philosophers. And one of them, Theodor Adorno, said, when talking about film, he said, the laughter of an audience reminded him of some of the worst forms of bourgeois sadism. I thought, well, there's a guy who hasn't seen a good Marx Brothers movie. So that, for some reason, that led me into film. And I took some summer classes, at UCLA. I realized you could, during the summer, you could take, there was no distinction between the in-state and out-of-state tuition. So it's pretty cheap to come out to LA, take a couple cinematography classes. And I really loved it. I mean, UCLA smells like eucalyptus and opportunity, it's a fantastic campus. It was real learning, real 60 millimeter filmmaking. This great Czechoslovakian, cinematographer who's our professor there. And that really kind of gave me the bug for it. And then, went back to campus, and I was very much involved with this. We did have a group on campus where we showed films. We had a film series that screened films every night. And, I think these were my earliest experiences as a programmer, because we would show Monday and Tuesdays were classic, nights, and Wednesdays and Thursdays were foreign films. And on the weekends we'd have B movies and, and midnight movies and second run films. And so I was involved with that. And because I was the one guy who knew how to use 60 millimeter camera, I was in charge of shooting the trailer that said coming soon and no smoking. And those were sort of my first real productions, getting a bunch of people involved. And that was a lot of fun. But then I kind of put the filmmaking on hold a little bit. After college, I moved out to DC and worked a little bit as a journalist. And then mainly for about a year and a half, I was a speechwriter for Senator Tom Harkin from Iowa. And but even doing that, we would shoot a lot of his speeches, the recording studio hidden in the basement of the Capitol. And so we record, it was just very simple, video set up down there. But it sort of got me hanging out with the guys in the booth, and sort of kept my interest in filmmaking alive. And then decided if you stay in DC too long, by the time you hit 30, they make you a lawyer. They just give you a law degree by osmosis and a three-piece suit. So I thought, well, I don't know if I'm that guy. So why don't I apply to film school? And I did. And the only film school I got into was USC. And so I went there, started making movies.
When you were doing that programming, I'm curious what your film education was at the time. Were you discovering these movies at the same time that you're programming them, or?
Absolutely. Yeah. It really was kind of learning by doing. Yeah, because what would happen in the mid 80s, late 80s, universities across the country had similar screening series where you would get these catalogs from, I think, New Yorker films and Swank films and, these 60 millimeter things. And so they would always have these descriptions like, oh, this Fellini film or Fail Safe, this, 1963, black and white film, or, The Man Who Fell to Earth, or different things like that. And they would always have a little bit of a description about them too. And they all just sounded amazing, and we had these little committees and we'd all get together and talk about them. But yeah, I think finally, I think by senior year, there was one sort of history of film history class, that had cropped up on campus. And I did take that, but that was kind of late in the game. But yeah, it was very much, hey, this film's cool. And then, 4 months later, we'd watch it, on the big screen. But yeah, this is before you couldn't just watch trailers online, to see if you liked a film. So it was like, oh, maybe one person on the committee is like, oh, I remember seeing that once. Or all of us would be like, oh, none of us have seen this, but it sounds really cool, So we would just kind of take a chance and see what would happen.
I'm very curious about one of your earliest filmmaking experiences working on the magnum opus that would eventually become known as American Kickboxer 2.
Right. Yeah. So this started, an incredible film. Incredible is one word for it. But yeah, my involvement with American Kickboxer 2 would start, I had been at USC for 1 year, my first year there. And during the summer, all the grad students and probably undergrads too, most of them, we would try to get these jobs, these internships, just like doing script coverage, just reading scripts and writing synopses of them in kind of these air-conditioned Hollywood offices, for production companies or studios or things like that. And I had one of these lined up, and I wasn't really looking forward to sitting in an air-conditioned office. That's not why you moved to LA. So, but then as the semester was drawing to an end, I went to the bulletin board, the job listing bulletin board. And I see a flyer that said, interns needed for 1 week of feature filmmaking in LA. Oh, that sounds good. And it said terrorist filmmaking. I thought, terrorist film? I've never heard of that. I've heard of guerrilla filmmaking, but I wonder what terrorist filmmaking is. And so I called the number on the sheet of paper, and it was this guy with this thick Hungarian accent that, hello. And I said, yeah, hi, what is this terrorist filmmaking? He said, oh, I meant to write guerrilla filmmaking, but my dictionary was wrong. And I thought, oh, well, this is intriguing, So yeah, and it turned out he was this kind of nutty Hungarian director who had gone to Columbia Film School with the guy that was my screenwriting professor. There was a little USC connection, and they had, my professor had written this kickboxing movie that was set in LA, but they had found a a Hong Kong producer who shoots all his films in the Philippines. And so they were going to shoot the exteriors for 1 week in LA and then go to the Philippines and shoot the rest of the movie. And so I came on board, and, it was great because in the first couple of days, it's sort of pre-production and production management. At one point, I picked up the Hong Kong producer at the airport, and he opens up his briefcase and it's filled with $300,000 in cash. And I thought, oh my gosh, what's that? And he goes, it's the budget. What else? And, yeah. And so this, and this was at a time when the triads were really running the film business in Hong Kong. It was a pretty dangerous time. But this guy David Hung, he was deathly afraid of the triads. That's why he shot all his movies in the Philippines. But anyway, and then we started shooting, and and I was a camera assistant for a couple of days and different things like that. And finally, by the third day, the producer says, "Oh, Dan, you seem to be the only one who knows what's going on around here. Do you want to come with us to the Philippines, and we'll make you a second assistant director and dialogue coach and ultimately a few other things. We'll pay you, $400 a week, which sounded much better already than working in an air conditioned office for free all summer. So I asked the one question, and he said, "Oh, we'll fly you there." And I asked the one question that any film student in that situation should ask, which is there a return ticket? And there was, thankfully. So I said, sure, I'll go to the Philippines. So I went to the Philippines for 5 weeks and just worked on this really nutty movie where nobody spoke the same language. The director would yell Hungarian to the crew who spoke Tagalog, and I kind of translated broken English for everyone. And, but there's an old adage in filmmaking that you learn more from working on a bad movie than you do from working on a good movie. And I sure learned a lot on this one. So, and at the end, the producer said, "Dan, do you want to come back to LA?" And I said, yes, and be the post supervisor. I said, sure. Yeah. What's a post supervisor? So, well, you need to find us an edit room. I said, okay. So I went back to LA and actually found this porn company in LA, in Hollywood, that had an extra, editing suite. And I remember and they were very nice people. And I remember the name of the company was called Miracle Films. And their motto was, if it's a good film, it's a miracle. And then I became an assistant editor as well. And so I learned, so I came back to SC in the fall, and, all my friends, none of them had tans, because they'd been reading scripts all summer, but I came back and I had learned how to make a movie from beginning to end, from script to completion. And so that really gave me the confidence to be able to then say, look, for my thesis film, why don't I do a feature? All these people were doing shorts at the time, and and they weren't all good, or sometimes they'd be great for the cinematographer student. He'd have a great reel, but even the good ones, that people would go to meetings and the Hollywood agents and producers would say, "Well, that's great, kid. Now let us know when you've done a feature." And it's like, "Oh, what? I just spent $100,000 on a short." So I thought, why not cut to the chase and just make a feature? And this was, the early 90s, and Robert Rodriguez and Richard Linklater were making these, great indie films, in Texas and I say in Austin. And I thought, well, if they can do that in Austin and get local resources, why don't I go back to Nebraska, go back to Omaha, where I'm from, and shoot my first film there and just get a local cast and local crew and then put on a show. And so I wrote a script, with this great location called Carhenge, which is in western Nebraska, the old American car stuck in the ground in the exact shape of Stonehenge, and no one had ever shot there, and started the movie in Omaha on the other side of the state. And I knew a bunch of actors in Omaha, and then said to the film commission, "Oh, do you have a local producer that I should work with?" And because no one had ever shot an indie feature in Omaha, but there had been other productions there. And they said, "Oh yeah, well, there's this guy Dana, and he, his day job is pouring cement on construction sites, but he kind of wants to get into doing features. He does a lot of commercials." And I said, "Oh, okay." And they said, "Oh, and by the way, his grandfather's Robert Altman." And I said, "He's hired," and that was, I started working with Dana Altman then, and we're still partners to this day. So that was, and then we made Omaha the movie. And there was a feature, but it counted as my thesis, and we shot it on 35 millimeter. Panavision gave us free cameras, and Paramount gave us a free edit suite to cut on, And there were a few interesting people that worked on the film that have since gone on to do okay. Rian Johnson was a PA on the film for one day. He made that Star Wars movie, that Last Jedi thing. Ryan's done okay, and our camera assistant that day was Steve Yedlin, who shot The Last Jedi, and Ben Nelson, who was the governor, then became senator. Our biggest investor was Chuck Hagel, who later became senator and then Secretary of Defense. And it's got an interesting pedigree. And then, and that kind of laid the groundwork actually for Alexander Payne to start shooting his films in Omaha too. Because once we had kind of set up that there could be a local crew base and local cast base there, he was able to convince his producers on Citizen Ruth to shoot that film in Omaha. Alex has done okay since too.
How did Omaha the movie help create the Slamdance Film Festival?
We finished the film, and at the time, the way it would work is you would finish an independent film and then take it to something called the Independent Feature Film Market, which has since evolved into IFP Week, which is still a thing in New York. So people from around the country, you'd take your indie film to New York, and then hopefully the programmers from Sundance would show up, watch your film, as well as distributors. You would hope distributors watch it there. But you would hope the Sundance people would show up and invite you to Sundance. Because, at the time it was physically harder to submit films to festivals. Like you could send in a VHS tape, but to get them to watch it on the big screen was a big deal. Anyway, so we went to this thing, met a lot of other great filmmakers, which was fun. We had a great screening. I had a distributor tell me point blank, "Oh, we love the film and we want to pick it up for distribution." I said, "Terrific." And I said, "Oh, if it gets into Sundance," like just very matter of factly. But that was really, the situation at the time. So if you got into Sundance, you get distribution, you get, you would get an agent, you'd get a producer, you'd get laid, you'd have a life, you'd have a career. And, but if you didn't, you would get none of those things. So what happened was, Sundance didn't take the film. And in fact, of the 95 completed films that showed that year at the IFFM, Sundance didn't take a single one. And really what was going on was in the broader context in the mid 90s, was in, heading into January of 95, was that it was kind of the era of the Hollywoodization of independent film. Around that time, Warner Brothers had just acquired Fine Line. Fine Line became part of Warner Brothers. Disney had just brought in Miramax. Miramax had become part of Disney. Fox was launching Fox Searchlight, and so Sundance was kind of along for the ride. They picked up on this momentum and tried to ride that wave, and so they were showing more films by second-time directors, established directors with bigger budgets, bigger name actors, and that sort of thing. And they kind of left behind this niche of the first-time director. All of us that had been kind of inspired by that sort of first wave of Sundance filmmakers, the Soderberghs and Linkletters and Rodriguez and those guys. We got together with these other filmmakers, and we had heard of a couple individual filmmakers the year before, specifically James Marandino had a film called The Upstairs Neighbor that didn't get into Sundance, and so he had done a little renegade screening. Also, a couple guys named Trey Parker and Matt Stone with their first film, their graduate film their thesis film out of the University of Colorado called Cannibal the Musical. That hadn't gotten into Sundance, and so they had done their own little renegade screening. And they each individually had gotten a little bit of press and attention for those little renegade screenings, but we'd heard about them and thought, well, why don't we take that idea and really just combine all of our efforts? And so in the end, we wound up with a dozen features and a dozen short films. We came up with a name that would look good on a t-shirt, and, we all kind of shared resources and expertise, and we put on a show, and that became Slamdance.
What were those early slam dances like? I mean, the one that I went to was literally right down the street from Sundance, and I have to say it was a little bit more appealing than Sundance was.
Oh, well, thanks. Do you remember which year that was, or what was that at the Arrow, or?
I think it was at the Arrow. In the screening room, though it was much bigger, it felt as homey as watching something in somebody's living room, which was a really nice feeling. I mean, it felt like you were there with all the right people watching stuff, all with the right intentions.
Oh, well, that's great. And that, you know, and that really is the spirit that we've tried to kind of stick with, through the years. But yeah, I mean, the first year one of us had Shane Kuhn, who's one of the other founders, he had a connection to the University of Utah, which is in Salt Lake City. And all of us looked at the map and we're like, oh, well, that's just like an inch away from Park City. So why don't we just do our screenings there? And people from Park City will, you know, who are at Sundance, will just come to our screenings. And then, of course, we get there and it turns out it's like a 40-mile drive. And it's, you know, who knew, right? And so within a day, we realized, wait a minute, this is not really going to work. You know, we're not going to get anybody to come to our screenings. So then, Lisa Raven and Frank Hudak, who had a film called Low, and I jumped on board. We rented a 60 millimeter projector, because the university was great because they had 35 millimeter projectors, they had 60 millimeter projectors, they had this great screening rooms. But anyway, so the three of us rented this 60 millimeter projector. We drove up the mountain in the middle of a blizzard. And I remember the window was cracked open. I was sitting in the back of this, you know, rented Honda and with snow blowing in my face, because we had those screens sticking out the window. And we were able to rent a meeting room, at a hotel meeting room at the Prospector Hotel. Now, this was at the time, it was the same hotel where Sundance had their biggest screening venue. But like at 11 o'clock at night, the night clerk, he doesn't care about Sundance. He's like, oh, you want to rent a meeting room? Okay. So he gave us a little meeting room, and it was literally 20 feet down the hall, from Sundance's biggest venue. And, you know, by this point we'd had a fair bit of press, so people kind of knew who we were. They just didn't know where we were. So people showed up the next day, and we scheduled all of our screenings for 15 minutes after the Sundance screenings. So their sold out line, you know, their rush line just came right into our screening venue, and we started screening films there. And then a couple of days later, we found a guy that was showing short films at the Yarrow Hotel, which is down the block. He said, oh, is it too late to get into Slamdance? We said, well, yeah, it's a little late, you know, we have a program. He's like, oh, that's too bad, because I have two 35 millimeter projectors screening my short film in Park City. We're like, you do? Well, congratulations, you're in Slamdance. And we just took over his operation and started screening our films there. So it really was a bit of a homespun operation, you know, really right from the beginning. And we've tried to keep it, you know, kind of small and intimate ever since. And you know, and our focus for competition films has always been first-time directors without distribution or without U.S. distribution, and working on low budgets, you know, whatever that is at any given moment. But and we've really kind of stuck with that, and I think because of that, it's, you know, we've kind of, filmmakers don't have the same level of expectations, like, oh, I'm going to be discovered by Harvey Weinstein, you know, and turned into the next big thing. It's like, yeah, you know, something might happen to you, your career down the road. But, you know, while you're here at Slamdance, you know, let's all support each other, learn from each other, collaborate, and you know, and launch those careers, you know, and that's really what's happened. And we've had, you know, an amazing run of alumni that have, whose first films we've shown, including, you know, Ryan Johnson, and we showed his first short, and then our programming is done by alumni too. So, you know, Ryan was a programmer, and I think he helped program the Russo brothers' first film. Then they became programmers, and they helped program, you know, Christopher Nolan's first film. And, you know, Chris met Wally Feister at Slamdance, and they went on to a great collaborative, career for years. You know, to, you know, Lynn Shelton and Lena Dunham's first films, and Jeremy Saulnier and Sean Baker and the Safdie brothers and the Zellner brothers, and most of the brothers have been involved with Slamdance. And, you know, it's just been a great community, because, as I say, a lot of these people have stayed involved as alumni, as programmers. And so, you know, it's a great, it's a great community of filmmakers that we've kind of nurtured over the years, and then we try to co-opt them, you know, too. So,
changing gears a little bit, can you tell me, who is Martin Eisenstadt?
Martin Eisenstadt was an advisor to the McCain campaign, the John McCain campaign in 2008, and he was also a pundit. He was a senior fellow at the Harding Institute for Freedom and Democracy, a think tank in Washington named after the third worst president in U.S. history. But it previously was the second worst president in U.S. history. That ranking has changed a little bit. And, Eisenstadt was a very influential figure during the 2008 presidential campaign. And for example, he was the guy who claimed to have been the one who spread the rumor that Sarah Palin thought that Africa was a country instead of a continent. And, there was only one problem with him, which some people in the media eventually found out about after quoting him extensively, and that was that he didn't technically exist. So there was that problem with Marty Eisenstadt, and he was, as it turned out, a complete creation of myself and my friend Eitan Gorlin, another Slamdance filmmaker. We had collaborated on a series of short films and a TV pitch about this guy. Just kind of accidentally, people thought he was real and started quoting him during that whole campaign. And then it all kind of came to a head when MSNBC had breaking news. Marty Eisenstadt is the source of the Palin Africa story, and had pundits talking about it, which is exactly what we were satirizing in the first place, these kind of dial-up pundits who show up. And then 2 days later, we outed ourselves to the New York Times. They wrote a very nice half-page profile on us, and that got picked up by the AP, ran all over the world, and Washington Post, and we got on CNN, and the next day we got a book offer. We were like, what's a book? Never seen one of those before. And it was from Farrar, Straus, Giroux, which we'd never heard of, but it turned out they were a very prestigious publisher in New York. We thought they were a hoax. We thought they were someone hoaxing us, but then they took us out for lunch and they paid the bill, and we were like, well, they must be real then. And this was at a time in fall of 2008, if you recall, when the economy, there had just been the election, but there was also the economy had just collapsed. And so this was a little side project that we were doing in my garage while I was trying to get my film Between Us made. Eitan was trying to get his new feature made. And then when, with the economy collapsing, there was no way to get an independent film of any size made at that time. So when presented with the option, do you keep not getting paid to direct a movie, or do you get paid to write a book? Your wife tells you to write a book. So we wrote a book called I Am Martin Eisenstadt, One Man's Wildly Inappropriate Adventures with the Last Republicans, and which is essentially a memoir from this guy who doesn't exist. And it's kind of, the whole thing is a satire of the Washington punditocracy. And we actually got great reviews on the book, and went back to Washington, did a fun, book tour there, and Joe Lockhart, Bill Clinton's press secretary, threw a big party at his house for us, and all the real pundits were there, and we were running into senators and congressmen's wives. It was a very strange time. And then came back to LA and pitched the TV show again. And actually Ashton Kutcher's company wanted to make it. They were really excited. And then they had a deal with CBS Studios. They were excited. And then at the last second, we were all going to go pitch it to Showtime. At the last second, the executive at Ashton Kutcher's company got fired or quit or something. And then the whole thing just disappeared. No one's returned. We're still waiting for people to return our phone calls from that. And so that was when I said, so much for TV. Why don't I go back to this play adaptation that I've been working on called Between Us, which is an adaptation of a hit off-Broadway play. And so why don't I just go back to making another indie film? And so I did. And then we did that one with Julia Stiles and Taye Diggs and David Harbour and Melissa George. And that film had a really nice life.
Tell me, how did you meet Jules Feiffer?
Between Us, the film that I was just talking about, that tonally was very much of a drama, and mainly we thought it was going to be a dark comedy, but nobody laughed, so we just told everyone it was a drama. But tonally, it was very much influenced by Carnal Knowledge, the great Mike Nichols film from 1971 with Jack Nicholson, Mark Garfunkel, and Candice Bergen, and Anne Margaret, and so. There's just been an influence on my cinematographer and me. And while I was in post-production on the film, I remember thinking, I wonder what happened to the guy who wrote that. And that was, of course, Jules Feiffer. And I knew him. I knew of him a little bit. He had been a cartoonist for the Village Voice for 44 years, actually won a Pulitzer Prize for political cartooning for that. He'd won an Oscar for a short animated film in the 60s. He'd written Carnal Knowledge. He'd written Little Murders that Alan Arkin directed. He wrote Popeye that Robert Altman directed. And I thought, I wonder what happened to this guy. And so I just Googled him, found this interview, I think in Chicago Sun-Times, and it said, oh, he's in his 80s, he's living in the Hamptons, he's doing some teaching, he's still writing graphic novels now, he's writing plays still, because he was a 2-time Obie winning and 1-time Tony nominated playwright too. He's a very successful playwright. And anyway, I had this very nice interview with him, but in the very end of the article, it had a little throwaway line where it said, oh, and by the way, he had several unproduced screenplays. And I thought, well, this is better than he got. This is a guy who's won a Pulitzer, an Oscar, 2 Obies, and a Tony nomination. That's a Putin. Not too many people have a Putin, right? So I tracked him down, and he got back to me right away and said, yeah, I think I've got some scripts, but I've been divorced a few times. Everything's in storage. I don't know where anything is, but let me look, and I'll try me back in 4 months. Okay. So tried him back 4 months later. Yeah, I still don't know where anything is. Try me back another 4 months. And this went on for a year and a half. And at one point, I even met his daughter, Hallie Feiffer, who very coincidentally had a film at Slamdance that she had starred in and wrote and produced. Anyway, she didn't know where these screenplays were. And finally, my friend Kevin DeNovis, who's another Slamdance filmmaker, had a film called Surrender Dorothy that won our jury prize years ago. Kevin knew I was having this correspondence with Jules and said, oh, I think I remember reading one of his screenplays. I said, where? He said, well, it was in this magazine called Scenario Magazine that in the late 90s, a magazine that would publish mainly produced screenplays, but every now and again unproduced screenplays. They would have the screenplay to Big or Indiana Jones or something like that. And I said, well, Kevin, do you still have your magazine? And she goes, oh, well, I just got divorced. Everything's in storage. I don't know where anything is. So I finally tracked down the one library in America that still had copies of it, and it was the Academy Library. The Oscar people. They have a library in LA, which is not far from my house. I went there, read the magazine, and had a little article explaining the genesis of the script, Bernard and Huey. And the script was based on cartoon characters that went back to 1957 and Feiffer's Village Voice strip, and then he kind of brought them back as they were originally like these 2 sort of college age characters in the East Village, and then he brought them back in the 80s as these 2 middle-aged guys in a recurring 6-panel strip in the back of Playboy magazine for all the people that were reading Playboy for the cartoons. They were right there. And then based on that, he got hired by Showtime. Showtime commissioned him to write a screenplay based on these characters. But the week he turned it in, they changed ownership and they changed their whole business plan to, boxing or comedy or whatever it was. And so they never paid him for it. And then meanwhile, he had a producer, a guy named Michael Brandon at the time. Well, he's still called Michael Brandon. He and Jules tried to pitch it to Hollywood as a big budget, feature film. There wasn't really an appetite for independent film much at the time. So, and they didn't have any luck with it. And so it just sat on a shelf. Anyway, so I called Jules and said, oh, I just read Bernard and Huey. Oh, Bernard and Huey. Yes, that's the one. That's the one you should, we've been looking for. And he said, but I seem to remember my assistant sent them an abridged version. What you read may not have been the final version of the script. I said, well, that's great. Let's call your old assistant. Maybe she has an old floppy disk of the thing. Oh, no, she's dead. I go, oh, my gosh, that's horrible news. I'm sorry to hear that. So, well, what about your agent? You had a big agent back then. Oh, no, he's dead too. Oh, my gosh, that's horrible. So what about your lawyer? You had a big lawyer. No longer among the counted. He is dead. So I said, wow, that's just bad luck. But together we tracked down this guy, Michael Brandon, this producer of his, who, God bless him, was still alive, still married, still had his archive. And he found us a type version of the completed script. And which was great. And then actually a few months later, I realized that Jules had actually donated some of his archives to the Library of Congress and had a little bit forgotten about that. And I sent a buddy of mine to DC. He went through the archives of the Library of Congress and found the original handwritten copy of the script with on yellow legal pads with crossouts and arrows and little doodles of the characters inside. And so that was kind of fun to get our hands on that. And then, and then we had to make sure we could get the rights to it. So we had to call Playboy, call Village Voice, call Showtime, all these people. And finally Feiffer's like, he's 87 at this point. He's like, when are we making this thing, Mirvish? Come on. I'm like, all right, well, now we just have to make the film. How hard can that be? So then we did.
So Between Us was what, 2008, 2009?
2013. It was like 5 years ago. But yeah, by the time it came out, it was 13. I think we shot it maybe in 2011. Yeah, because I had taken like basically 2 years to do the Eisenstadt book and the book tour and the TV pitches and all that. And so it was this sort of like 2-year hiatus between when we thought we were going to make Between Us at a $3 million budget to when we actually shot it, for like $65,000 when we started shooting, something really small. So
Bernard and Huey comes out in 2017, so that's a long stretch to try to track down all this stuff. I mean, just the legwork that you had to do to get the script sounds incredible.
Yeah, it was a journey, I mean, it took like I said, like about a year and a half to find the script, and then another year to a year and a half. I mean, we had to, Jules didn't have an agent or a lawyer or an assistant, so we had to sort of find those things again for him to sort out the contract all over again and track everything down. So that it took a while just to get the contractual stuff sorted out, and then once we did. And then once we did, then we did a Kickstarter campaign, raised a little bit of money that way. You shouldn't expect to raise your whole budget that way. It's called Kickstarter and Kick Finisher, and then worked on casting and raising the rest of the financing through equity, just investors and then shooting it. That process was not that long. That was like 17 months from when we had the contract all signed and ready and, ready to move forward to shooting was less than a year and a half, which, in that respect, that doesn't sound that long, but but the whole time it was an enjoyable process for me too. I was getting to meet Feiffer and getting to know him and filming him a little bit too. And he's just got such amazing stories about, he was he was friends with Stanley Kubrick, and Kubrick had asked him to write Strangelove, and he didn't like his take on Strangelove, so their buddy Terry Southern wrote it, and Fellini was a big fan of Feiffer's, and they became friends. And of course, Altman had crazy stories about Altman and introducing Jack Nicholson to Warren Beatty at an Altman party on the set of McCabe and Mrs. Miller. Just like fun stories like that you just don't hear every day. So so this whole process, even though it was a bit of a grind and a bit of a search, it was an enjoyable and exciting one for me. So there were a couple other little projects I was trying to do along the way. Oh, I wrote a book in that time, The Cheerful Subversive Guide to Independent Filmmaking, which is out now on Focal Press and Rutledge, and I had that to fill my time. So it's not not like I was doing nothing, and I drive my kids to school. That keeps me pretty busy.
How close to what was originally supposed to be on Showtime was Bernard and Huey to what we see today when we see it on Amazon Prime or iTunes or any place else that digital films are available?
Yes, or in theaters. It is still playing in a few theaters and will be playing in the next few weeks in Omaha and Lincoln and Baltimore. It's going to be playing and in Mill Valley, we're screening. But, when I first read that script, in the magazine, and I first talked to Feiffer about it, I mean, I really loved it. And I thought the characters were these kind of evergreen characters that were, timeless and timely, both at the same time. Contemporary scenes of these two middle-aged guys were set, in 1986. That was when he wrote it. And there were flashbacks to 1960. When these guys are kind of post-collegiate age characters. And I said to Jules, I said, well, look, I think it's all great material, but I said, my kinds of indie film budgets, it's hard enough to do one period movie, much less two different periods. So I said, do you mind if we move everything up 30 years? And so the contemporary scenes are contemporaneous to us now. And then the flashbacks were to about 1988. And he was totally fine with that. And we thought we were going to have to change a lot more of the script. And remarkably, when we went through it, there was really very little we had to change. I mean, I loved the original Feiffer dialogue. I mean, that's why you have a Feiffer script. But even just the mechanics of the plot, which are about these two middle-aged guys who haven't seen each other in 25 years. They kind of reconnect. And one had been like this kind of alpha male, and the other was his never-she best friend, and they've kind of swapped roles in a sense, and one starts dating the other guy's 25-year-old daughter, played in the movie by Mae Whitman, who now she's an aspiring graphic novelist in the film, and Jim Rash, Bernard, plays an editor at W.W. Norton, and then she's trying to get a publishing deal, through him. So that's the one slight part of the plot that did change. In the original, she was an aspiring cartoonist, but her aspiration was to be in the back of the Village Voice, in the back of the alternative comics. Because if you think about it, in 1986, that was kind of the height of cartooning. It's what Feiffer was doing. It's where, Matt Groening came from, and that was kind of the apex of cartooning. And so in the original script, that's what she wanted to do. And Bernard worked at the Village Voice in a different department, but he worked at the Village Voice. And so I said, well, why don't we change it to what Jules himself is now doing, which is at 89, he's a best-selling graphic novelist. He just actually his new graphic novel, I'm staring at it right now, my hands on it, it's called The Ghost Script, just came out, it's just coming out this week, basically. Also from W.W. Norton. For 20-somethings, millennial, if you're a cartoonist, that is kind of the apex of that medium is graphic noveling. So we just changed Mae Whitman's character, Zelda, who plays Huey's daughter, to wanting to be a graphic novelist. What's interesting is that those subtle little changes actually meant that we had very little else to change in the script. And I think what's interesting is if someone had made this film, say 15 years ago or 10 years ago, I think there would have been a real temptation to make that character a web designer or something digital. And that would have necessitated a lot more changes just in the mechanics of the plot. And so oddly enough, by waiting 30 years, so many things in culture and society and language are so cyclical that I think it sort of works in a way that it might not have worked 10 or 15 years ago. So yeah, but the other thing too is I think as a direct, when you're adapting someone else's material or, a play or a book, or in this case, a screenplay, you need to find your own way into the material emotionally, especially on an indie film where you're not getting paid much. You're not doing it for the paycheck. If you're not emotionally connected to the material, your cast and your crew and your investors are all going to sense that, and you're going to get discouraged. There's so many roadblocks in independent film, you're just going to walk away from it at some point. So for me, what was nice was by updating it 30 years, I'm now about the same age that Jules was when he wrote it. I'm about the same age as the characters are. The flashbacks are now to when I was in my post-collegiate age years. And in fact, we even shot some of those scenes in my garage as Huey's apartment, with all my old stuff, my posters and signs and records and everything. And so it's, that was kind of my way into the material in a way that I think Jules certainly appreciated, and he was totally fine with that. So, but then cinematographically, we wanted to kind of pay homage to the, to the legacy of Feiffer and his original and Carnal Knowledge and his other films and material from that era. So we, the DP, Todd Somodevilla, he and I, and Todd, by the way, had been Ryan Johnson and Steve Yedlin's roommate at USC 30 years ago, had all these weird connections. He and I decided to, even though the contemporary scenes are set now, we shot them in kind of a retro style with long takes and a true single camera, anamorphic primo zoom lenses, even though it was on an Alexa body, and have these like 4 or 5 minute takes. And so there's a stylistic kind of homage to the time, even though, it's set now. So, and in the flashback scenes we shot on film on Super 16.
The chemistry between Bernard and Huey is so critical, and I'm very curious how you came up with these two leads.
In independent film, you never are going to have the luxury of having some sort of platonic ideal of the perfect casting list or the perfect people that you have in mind. So because of that, you never want to have a list, and I certainly don't. It always is very much about schedule and availability and desire, finding actors that really want to do it. And that may not necessarily be the people that you want. Sometimes it is. And so because of that, we had a very open approach to casting. We went out to the agencies and management companies and said, well, or who do you think is best? And I've written a lot about how to do casting on these kinds of things. So we didn't really have any preconceived ideas about race or body type. They could be fat, skinny, didn't really matter. And then in the end, the agent suggested David Koechner. And he'd been in a couple of Slamdance films, and I knew a few directors that had worked with him. And I'd heard Adam Scott actually talk on a podcast about how great he was to work with on Krampus. And Koechner has this great body of work from, Anchorman and the movies and The Office, is pretty broad, sort of comedy background. And he got his start at Second City, and he was on SNL for a season and UCB and all these things. But like a lot of comedic actors, he also wants to do, some more serious stuff. And he's been in other more serious indies like, Thank You for Smoking and some other things like that. But he was really excited to take on a role that, while it was a comedy and it was certainly a take on the kind of roles that he's done before and the kind of persona that he has, it definitely gives it much more gravitas and some, some more meat to the bones. And so he was excited about that. But also it fit with his schedule. He had just wrapped doing a recurring role on the Goldbergs, and he was about to start, Superior Donuts on CBS. And so he had a nice gap in his schedule, and he's got 5 kids. He lives in LA. He's like, "Oh, you're shooting in LA? Perfect. I can go home at night, see my family," and that's a big part of casting for indie films, because they're not doing it for the money. So it's like, okay, well, does it fit in with their lifestyle? And then Jim Rash was a bit of an accident. We hadn't found a Bernard, and then, and we're getting a little nervous about that. And I was still raising money, and I had this big list of production companies that I call every time I make a movie, and called this one. And I said, "Oh, can I talk to the assistant?" I said, "Oh, can I talk to your boss about this movie we're making, Bernard and Huey?" And the assistant says, "Oh, I love Bernard and Huey." How have you read Bernard and Huey? That's crazy talk. I just called you right now. So no, we're also a management company, and we read the script, and we've actually already pitched our client, Jim Rash, to your casting director. I said, "You did?" She never told me that. So, just never made it through to me. And I said, "Oscar-winning screenwriter? That would look really good on a poster. Jim Rash." I said, "That's a great idea." So, and I went to I was getting ready to meet with Jim, and I texted Joe Russo, who's another Slamdance alum, and I knew Joe pretty well. And he was shooting, Captain America or, Infinity Wars, whatever, Marvel. But he texted me back right away. He said, "Oh, Jim Rash is terrific. You should totally cast him." And I was like, well, that's all I need to hear, really, so, but then Jim and I kind of hit it off, and, he'd won an Oscar for co-writing The Descendants with Alexander Payne, and I knew Alexander from Omaha. And so we had that to talk about. And again, he had just come off of playing Dean Pelton on Community, which is a very different part, very kind of out there role. And so he had time in his schedule because he was getting ready to write a screenplay with his writing partner, Nat Faxon. But I think Nat was busy on a sitcom or something like that, or on a show. So he couldn't write then that much. And he wanted to do a different part from Community. And honestly, not too many people offered Jim Rash leading roles as a romantic lead. So he was like, "Yeah, I've been working out at the gym every day. This could be good for me." So, and he was just excited, and, not for nothing, we got an Oscar-winning screenwriter, on board if we needed to find a new adjective or something. He was always around. So, and it was great. And these guys are both like master improvers. I mean, Koechner has this great background, and then Rash has been a master improv teacher at Groundlings in LA for 20 years. And so we did 4 days rehearsal with them and the young guys who played the young versions of them and the rest of the cast. And, just standing around my kitchen where I am right now, pacing. And, we just made all this, food and, had a great time just kind of getting the tone and the chemistry and the pacing of the film, everybody on the same page. And, by this point we had this great ensemble with Richard Kind and Nancy Travis and Sasha Alexander and Bellamy Young. And it was just, really wonderful actors all around. And what was nice is in rehearsal, because a lot of times these actors aren't in the same scenes together, but during rehearsal, everybody can kind of come together and overlap and see, Nancy Travis can see how Richard Kind is doing his scene. You can see how Sasha's doing her scene. And so everybody kind of gets on the same page. Like you're all making the same movie. And I think whenever you're directing an ensemble, that's really key. because you don't have a lot of time on set. I think we made the film in 14 days in LA and 2 days in New York, something like that. So, just shooting one camera. So, there's not a lot of time to play around on set. So, you almost make it in rehearsals.
Well, it sounds like the shoot was an absolute breeze with absolutely no problems, right?
Exactly. It was fun. It was more fun than my previous films had been. Honestly, it's nice when you're making a comedy or when you're making a musical. I've done those too. It's fun on set. Like you finish a scene, and if it works, the crew laughs. And the rest of the cast laughs. I can tell when things are working. There's always production challenges. The location that falls through, and the too hot or it's too cold, and the location. They double the location fee once you're there, and they screw you that way. And things like that. And Mae Whitman had a cold during most of the time we were shooting, so she was sick. So it's like, oh my gosh, but she was great. She just powered through it, and she was terrific. And it was really, we had a really dedicated crew, that hung together, and everyone worked really well together. There was no drama on set with any of the actors or the crew, which was terrific. And everybody wanted to make this film, for Jules. And a lot of the actors had these connections to him. Jim Rash had been in a Feiffer play in college. Actually, it was a play called Feiffer's People that has Bernard and Huey in as characters in that. And Sasha Alexander she had been at USC, and she had directed a short based on a short story that Jules had written. Richard Kind is friends with Feiffer. So, so we all were making it, kind of for him and for ourselves, and kind of doing it for the right reasons. And so it was a pretty, none of these shoots were effortless, but it was an enjoyable shoot, and I think because of that, all of the actors and Feiffer and myself, obviously, but we stayed involved. We played at 25 festivals in 5 continents, and a lot of the actors came to the Q&As and have continued to do press and interviews, through the release of the film, and that doesn't always happen. When you have this many actors, to get them to show up and do press a year and a half after you shoot a film, when they all have busy schedules, it's not always so easy. So yeah, it's kind of a testament to the fact that, this was kind of a fun process and fun project for all of us.
Well, you've seen the markets shift so much over the years. Here you are having to come together with these other filmmakers back in 95 and create Slamdance so that you actually have a venue to kick off your movie. And I'm curious now in 2017, 2018, what kind of venues are you able to get, and what's kind of the landscape out there for you once you have Bernard and Huey in the can? You talked about the film festivals, but what's kind of like that world outside of the festivals?
I actually think in 25 years, remarkably little has changed. 25 years ago at Sundance, like if you were at Sundance, and not just if you were at Sundance, but if you were like the winning film there, or the couple winning films, there was a little bit of a brass ring, and you could be the anointed indie filmmaker that year, but there were only like room for a couple of them. And I don't think that's changed much at all. There are still the power brokers. The names may have changed a little bit, but still, if you go to Sundance and you're one of the, and if you're one of the anointed few at Sundance, you can go on to, to become this acclaimed hot young indie filmmaker of that year. And you get what I call meaningful distribution. And so I think, whereas now, I heard John Sloss put it, a big lawyer, a couple of years ago. He said, there used to be the definition of distribution was, maybe 2% of indie films got distribution. Now 100% of indie films get distribution. It's just that the definition of distribution has changed. Any idiot can put their own film out on VOD or iTunes or Amazon if you want. But getting people to notice it is another matter entirely. And that's still back to your 2% of indie films are getting that, what I call the meaningful distribution. So, we were, in a position where I didn't want to, I'm a big believer that you make a film, you show a film. You don't wait 6 months. Oh, I think I'm going to try to get into Sundance. And, I didn't get into Sundance. Maybe I'll get into South by. Oh, I didn't get into South by. Maybe I'll get into Tribeca. and then meanwhile, a year has gone by, and everyone, and you've wasted a year just applying to 3 film festivals, and so I'm a big believer in the culture of film festivals. Just like going to, a big part of making a film is showing a film, is showing it to audiences and engaging with audiences and at Q&As and introductions and panels and workshops and different things like that. And so we just hit the ground running. We finish it. On a Thursday, and Friday I was on a plane to Germany premiering it at the Oldenburg Film Festival. And, a month later or 3 weeks later, while they were being threatened with nuclear annihilation, we showed the film in Guam at the Guam Film Festival. But we won a grand jury prize there because apparently no one wanted to go to Guam that week. I don't know why. We just kept going to, fun, exciting film festivals in interesting places in Barbados and Sao Paulo and Montreal and, different places like that. And just finding an audience and getting reviews and then ultimately getting distribution for the film. We found a pretty good distributor, Freestyle, which is part of Byron Allen's company, Entertainment Studios, and they're good folks over there. And we got a 10-city theatrical release, played in in LA, in New York, San Francisco, Cleveland, Minneapolis, Miami, for 1 week, but then they do a day and date release on VOD, iTunes, that kind of thing. But then what's nice is they've been very cool about letting me then continue to book the film in places like Anchorage and Omaha, Lincoln, Baltimore, DC. I think we have another screening coming up there. And I'm dovetailing it with guest lectures that I'm giving at universities this fall in different places. In Mill Valley, we're doing that. And they've been so even though the film is out already on VOD, anyone could watch it if they want on iTunes, and please do. They can still see it on the big screen because it is a big screen movie, So in some of these places, and Feiffer is actually coming with me. We're doing a Q&A together at the screening in Baltimore, and some of the cast and crew are going to be at the Omaha and Lincoln screenings, and we're doing actually also a retrospective screening of Omaha the movie in Omaha on that same trip. So that'll be a lot of fun. But look, in 1995, I ultimately self-distributed Omaha the movie and played it in 33 cities around the country on 35 millimeter film, literally hustling, a 40-pound can of film around. And we wound up with an 11-week run at Laemmle's in LA, with me standing in front of the theater wearing a sandwich board. Well, cut to 24 years later, and a week or a month ago, I was in front of Laemmle's Monica wearing a sandwich board again, promoting Bernard and Huey. It hasn't really changed. If you're an independent filmmaker or any kind of media creator of one sort or another, like one way or the other, you got to strap on a sandwich board, because no one's going to promote your film as well as you. You can have the best distributor in the world. This week it may be A24. Last week it would have been the Weinsteins, whoever it is. But if you're not promoting it yourself, just as much and just as hard as your distributor, people see that and they pay, and they see the passion that you've got for your own film. And, my actors are like, well, I'm not going to put on a sandwich board, but Jesus, Mirvish is. That's crazy. But okay, I guess I'll show up to do the Q&A, and I think you still need to do that. And whether it's a physical sandwich board, as I like to do, or the digital version, Twitter and Instagram and Snapchat and FaceChat and whatever, it's the same attitude of, yes, this is my work and I am proud of it. And I want you, the audience, to come see it. And, and I think filmmakers need to think of themselves almost as performers, as putting on a play. Like you can show a film on iTunes, but there's no feedback. It's a film is like a tree in the forest. If you don't know that anybody's not seeing it, how do you know that nobody didn't see it? So that's why I think festivals are so great, because you can get a good audience and you can get, you can get a Q&A. I'm still going to festivals. Bernard and Huey is opening my film at the Woodhull Film Festival this weekend in Massachusetts. I'm heading out to that. And I love doing Q&As and talking about these great stories. And because, that's part of the performance. It's where we are creating these pieces of entertainment, and part of entertainment is the feedback, to hear an audience laugh or cry or shriek or whatever it is you've made. So yes, I'm a big believer in getting the film out there, and don't wait around for Sundance to anoint you or South by to anoint you. Just find another festival or start your own if you need to.
You've dropped a lot of names while we've been talking about the Russo brothers, talking about Rian Johnson, Christopher Nolan, all these guys. I have to say, when you said Byron Allen, I almost plotzed, because I was just like, holy shit, Byron Allen from Real People? I couldn't believe that you...
Yeah, he's got this amazing company called Entertainment Studios that then they bought out Freestyle, which was a standalone company for many years. But look him up. I mean, he has very quietly, or not so quietly, amassed this giant entity. He owns like a whole bunch of cable channels. He just bought the Weather Channel. I'm surprised he didn't have Jim Rash and Koechner, doing the hurricane reports, in the last week. That would have been great for us. But yeah, Byron Allen has this amazing entertainment entity now, and has all these cable channels and everything. So go figure. But yeah, he, just in the last couple of years, they've bought a couple films out of Toronto last year. Chappaquiddick was probably their biggest release as a studio. But yeah, and then my little film. So go figure. But then they're close to my house. So honestly, I'm a big believer in proximity. Like oh wow, I can just drive to your office and pick up the posters or drop off a form or whatever. Cool, you're sold. I pick you. So I like that a lot about these guys, and they've been very nice to deal with, and they were very happy with the release. I mean, they were thrilled that Feiffer was able to come into New York and do Sirius XM interviews, and that Jim Rash was able to get on radio shows and do interviews, and the film's gotten great reviews. It's very fresh on Rotten Tomatoes, very, very fresh, and getting great reviews in the New York Times and stuff. So, and then it's still kind of continuing because Feiffer's got this graphic novel coming out, and so so he's doing a bit of a tour and press junkets just for the graphic novel, and so I'm working actually with the publicist at W.W. Norton. And of course, he was surprised because W.W. Norton is in our movie, and it's like, which is a little meta and self-reflective. But so we're still, that's why we're kind of, still out there with the film and promoting it and trying to spread the word about it. I mean, just because you get a 1 week release doesn't mean you should stop promoting the film after 1 week. Where's the fun in that? So.
Dan, give me all the links. Where's the best place for people to keep up with you in the film?
I try to keep up to date on BernardandHueyMovie.com. And then on Twitter, it's Bernard and Huey, at Bernard and Huey, or it might be at Bernard and Huey Movie. And on Facebook, similarly. I keep Twitter and Facebook up to date on those. And then for myself, again, just follow me on the Twitter. I'm sure I'm saying horribly offensive things that are going to get me fired in 10 years. But yeah, I'm at Dan Mirvish, and then on Facebook, I don't try to friend me. I think I'm filled up I've hit my 5,000 people. You can follow me there. And then my website is danmirvish.com. And then you can buy my book, the Cheerful Subversive Guide to Independent Filmmaking. That's on there. You can get that on Amazon. And of course, Bernard and Huey, you can get on iTunes if you want, or come see one of the screenings we have coming up. And then the Martin Eisenstadt book, that's still available. It's actually in its second printing. And, and that's becoming more relevant every day, honestly. The whole Martin Eisenstadt thing, is remarkably prescient into the whole world of Trump. Eisenstadt even had a Russian girlfriend who he didn't realize was a spy, and not unlike the current situation with the spy who was shacking up with a third-rate pundit, from a fourth-rate think tank. It's like, oh my God, that's literally a page out of our book. So it's very weird. I mean, we invented fake news back when it was still cool. So, but but yeah, so please buy that book and you'll be amazed. And yeah, that's I'm selling all my wares right there. So yeah, please check it all out.
The cheerfully subversive Dan Mirvish. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, well, thanks, Mike, and appreciate everyone listening.
If you enjoy this show and want more people to know about it, head on over to iTunes, leave a comment, and rate it 5 stars. Make sure you like and share us on Facebook, and don't forget to follow us on Twitter. Just search for Christopher Media. Thank you in advance for supporting Christopher Media by clicking on the PayPal button and by clicking through to all the sponsors who support ChristopherMedia.net. Most importantly, we would like to take the time to extend an extra special thanks to you. Christopher Media could not exist without your support. Thank you for visiting ChristopherMedia.net, and thank you for listening. Christopher Media. Let's make some noise.